Thank you, Your Worship. We do have several changes. Item 11.3, report from Director of Corporate Services, City of Salmon Arm Housing Task Force recommendations to be moved to item 5.1, presentations and delegations, which will be followed by item 15.1, notice of motion, and item 10.3, request for letter of support from CMHA. We also have an addition under 11.3, which is a housing strategy summary, an addition under item 20.1, which is a letter from M.A. Mills, an addition under 20.1, letter from A. Chin, addition under item 20.1, letter from J. Halliday. And that's it for now.
Yes, thanks, Mayor Cooper. And just pursuant to the corporate officers moving up in the agenda, could we also, and maybe I missed it, but could we also have the notice of motion? She mentioned that. Okay, I missed it then. Thank you.
Thank you for checking.
Thank you, Your Worship. In your agenda package, you will notice item 10.3 is a memo from the Director of Corporate Services. However, it really is a memo from the Housing Task Force in collaboration with Councillors Lavery and Wallace-Richmond. So I will just take a moment to preface it by saying that the Housing Task Force came as a result of a recommendation from the Social Impact Advisory Committee in late 2017. And following that, Council directed staff to create a Housing Task Force terms of reference. We did advertisements for spaces on the Housing Task Force. And since then, the Housing Task Force has met regularly. And we have with us today several members of the Housing Task Force, two of which will be speaking, Lana Fitt and Jeff Ragsdale. And I'll give Councillor Wallace-Richmond and Councillor Lavery a moment to say a few things before they come up.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I guess for me, days like today are really about saying thank you, taking a deep breath, recognizing where we are and recognizing that there is still indeed a great amount of work to do, but it can't be done without the community involvement. So my first thanks is to the Social Impact Advisory Committee, who's been working on this for not just months, but years, in fact, and their initiative has brought it to fruition. And then thank you to Council for recognizing the current situation and the changes at the provincial and federal front that have allowed us to pursue something we hadn't otherwise pursued. And finally, thank you to the Housing Task Force members for their time, their talent, and their commitment to making their community a better place. I want to say that as far as I'm concerned, this report is concrete and intentional in its directed efforts to do two things. One, understand the need for market housing and how as a city we can have policies and procedures and zoning that make that happen properly, fairly, and efficiently, but also the need for non-market housing, and that we have a responsibility to one another to find as many opportunities as we can, because affordable housing, while it's a terrible word in and of itself, it's affordability means something different to everyone else, to everyone that is, and we need to work together to recognize that only when everyone is affordably homed have we done a proper job of our time here.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace-Richmond. Councillor Lavery, you had a few words?
Yes, thanks, Mayor Cooper. And I may have a few words after the presentation from Lana and Jeff as well on this, but again, to extend the thanks to the Housing Task Force. I do want to just, it's in the record, but I do just want to read the names out of the Housing Task Force in terms of their experience and their expertise and their commitment to going forward on here. So from the Housing Social Services sector, we've got Don Dunlop and Jane Shirley as official appointees. The members from the development financial sector, Barry Delaney from SASCU, and Ian McDermott from McDermott Construction. We've had Councillor Louis Thomas and Dan Rogers from Nisconlith Indian Band attending, Stephen Teed from Adams Lake Band for most of the time we're meeting, two citizens at large who are also here, Calvin Berger and Jeff Ragsdale, and Lana Fitt from Economic Development. And I just want, again, thanks for their implication and for their investment in what we've been doing. I do have some comments after they speak, but I also want to do a shout out to my co-chair, Councillor Wallace Richmond. I think our mutual and probably individual approaches have blended really nicely in moving forward with this. There are some recommendations here we'll talk about later, but the sentiment of the Housing Task Force, and certainly from myself as co-chair, I think from Councillor Wallace Richmond as well, that we utilize the expertise that have been gained from the Housing Task Force. So I'd like to just hear from Lana and Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure. So Lana Fitt with Salmon Arm Economic Development Society.
Jeff Ragsdale. I'm a realtor at Royal LePage here in Salmon.
So thanks very much for allowing us a few brief moments for Jeff and I to present today some of the recommendations that are coming forward from the Housing Task Force Committee for Council's consideration. So as you know, the city established the Housing Task Force about 5 months ago with the goal of bringing forward some recommendations to Council in order to position Salmon Arm well to respond to future opportunities for housing development, and that's really looking at the full continuum of housing opportunities, including supportive housing for low and moderate income families, rental housing, and then attainable or affordable home ownership as well for our Salmon Arm residents. So as Councillor Lavery just went over, the task force consisted of 11 members, a really diverse group that came together for this project, consisting of social service agencies, economic development, our First Nation partners, as well as sector representatives from the construction and development and finance sectors. This group was led by Councillor Wallace Richmond and Councillor Lavery, who really did a great job in bringing everyone up to the same level of knowledge. Everyone approached this table with different areas of expertise, different experiences with housing, and different areas of interest as well. So they did a really excellent job of bringing us all together, bringing our knowledge level up to the same level for each of the members, and then at the same time keeping us focused on this goal of getting to where we are today, of bringing forward some recommendations to Council on the next best steps for our community in terms of housing. So over the last 5 months, we had the opportunity to meet every 2 weeks where we shared information collectively among the committee members. We had the opportunity to learn from outside presenters and really had a good opportunity to understand better what are the housing information gaps that Salmon Arm is facing right now, as well as what are some of the housing opportunities in our community. So the exercise itself of bringing the task force together, there was great value in that alone, just because most of the stakeholders around the table would otherwise not have had the opportunity to be sitting across the table from one another and sharing information. So I think that in itself, there was great value in the process. So the key findings of the task force are detailed in the memo that's before Council today, but really are 4 main areas that are detailed within the memo that our committee really drilled down to in terms of priorities and areas of focus include convening stakeholders, educating and communicating on housing needs, regulating and incentivizing housing development in Salmon Arm, as well as leveraging opportunities to invest in our local housing supply. So those 4 areas really form the foundation of the 3 recommendations that I'll invite Jeff to speak further about now.
Yeah, thanks, Lana. So yeah, it has been my privilege as well to sit on the board, or on the council rather, committee, try again, We have done a lot of hard work, and there's been a lot of good information sharing. So with regard to the recommendations that we would like council to consider, the first one being developing and implementing an achievable 5-year community housing strategy. Obviously, this has been the main focus of our work at the table, and we hope it's a broad-based community strategy with no silos, so lots of information sharing from various stakeholder groups, public engagement sessions, and collaboration. Secondly, we would like to request $60,000 from the 2019 budget to retain a consultant that can work on the housing strategy. After studying what other communities have done in terms of housing strategies, we felt this number was appropriate. We looked at probably half a dozen or so, and our numbers are in line with what other communities have asked for. And lastly, our recommendation would be that the Housing Task Force continue to play an active role in the development and implementation of the strategy. We encourage Council to extend the use of the task force for this purpose and amend the terms of reference as appropriate. There's quite a diverse group, as Lana mentioned, quite an experienced group. Just the collaboration with First Nations alone, I think, was well worth it. You know, you've got social services, economic development, real estate professionals, financial people involved. So you've got an active group of committed individuals that are willing to push this initiative forward. And I think that's all I would like to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for your presentation, and thank you for all your hard work. I know that both Councillor Lavery and Councillor Wallace-Richmond and all of you on the task force have worked really hard and really diligently on this, I think meeting like every 2 weeks. So you've really put in a lot of time and a lot of effort, and we absolutely respect and thank you for that. And also thank you for your recommendations. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just want to open it up to, does any of Council have anything they would like to say? Councillor Lavery?
Yes, thanks, Mayor Cooper, and thanks, Lana and Jeff. So as a bit of a background, because I know that we have some other folks in the gallery here who may not have been part of that conversation, but really the Housing Task Force had 2 separate streams. One was to get to where we are today, to come back with recommendations to council, and it's pretty clear. And I would emphasize it's been a very collaborative process of putting ideas together and tweaking them and going back and forth. So again, thanks to the Housing Task Force for that. So the first distinct stream is kind of, I don't want to say mission accomplished, because that didn't do too well for George Bush, but has been accomplished. And I think that we're at that stage now. The other one, though, was more of a rapid response in the interim to any opportunities that might crop up. And we all know, and we've all seen the graphic, and I'll try to emphasize it out here. For purpose-built social housing, up to the early 1980s, there was that amount on a graph. I'm doing my graph interpretation here. And from 95 on, it's about that amount. The investment from higher levels of government in purpose-built housing has basically fallen off the map. We're just starting to see opportunities that are coming forward now. And so the second aspect of this Housing Task Force was to say, okay, what's out there and what can we do to promote that and to share the information and to go forward with that. So I just wanted to say 2 things on that aspect of the response part, and it's something I hope that the Housing Task Force, I think its mandate is to go through for a few more months. We will carry on with that, and I would hope in the new council that Housing Task Force will be, mandate will be carried on, is until a community housing strategy is achieved, there is the need for this response to funding opportunities that are coming out. And I think the Housing Task Force, in conjunction with council, is best placed to do that. We have not, and I want to emphasize, missed any viable funding opportunity for Salmon so far, number 1. And number 2, and it's an item a little bit further here in our agenda, that there is really an incredible opportunity here now for mixed market housing that's coming forward. We have a nonprofit housing provider that will be applying for a grant in mid-September. It's going to be highly competitive across the province for people applying. because every community is in the same situation. But it's important to note, and I guess with the media here as well, that coming out of the Housing Task Force is support for the nonprofit housing provider who's applying for this grant for actually one of the most what would be the word? One of the best opportunities there's been in a long, long time for going forward. We don't know how it'll be. BC Housing will make the final determination of that sometime in November, but by mid-September, this Housing Task Force has supported that application in terms of the sharing of knowledge on that, and it's really important, in my view anyhow. I think there's been great work with the Housing Task Force, and it's been to support that applicant going forward. So again, thanks to the Housing Task Force for that. I'm hoping that the interim response thing will carry on. I fully expect it will. And I'm just so impressed with the capacity as a group that we have developed. I now know more about housing and the complexity of it and the need to have a master plan for moving forward than I ever anticipated when I first started off on this. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Lana and Jeff and all members of the Housing Task Force. I'd like to bring forward item number 15, the notice of motion, and I would like to move that Council waive the notice of motion and deal with that motion today. I would move that.
Second by Councillor Larson.
Just speaking to the motion briefly, I think it's important that we get the motion on the table. Certainly, Councillor Wallace-Richmond and Councillor Lavery have kept us well in the loop here, and so I don't think we need more time. I have a few questions during discussion, but I think that we can address the motion today. And so it needs unanimous consent in order to bring that motion forward. Then we can have discussion.
Okay. So, do I need to call a question on bringing the motion forward then today? Okay. So I will ask council then. All in favor of bringing the motion forward today? Opposed? Motion is carried. And so we can go ahead and...
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. First of all, I appreciate the work done by the councillors and the invitation to the rest of us to attend meetings and your education to us, so that I feel like I've been kept abreast by what's happening and certainly have gained knowledge. And the complexity of the issue, it's interesting because I think before we took this on, like many people, we thought, why don't we just build affordable housing? Why don't we just do it? And it's not so simple. So this motion to put money towards a housing strategy, the housing strategy is an important step in order to access provincial and federal funds. It's not something that necessarily tells us how to do it, but it is something that we need in order to submit for funding partners. I've read some others as members of the task force have, and I think the amount that's been requested is probably accurate. So I will support the motion to have that money put forward into the 2019 budget.
Okay. Councillor Jameson, speaking to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. And yes, thanks for your presentation and all the work that the task force has done. You brought together a really diverse group of people, as has already been mentioned, and you're looking at it from so many different ways. And I'm just going to back up, because there's two people in particular that are sitting up there that I remember working with as my time as chair, and that was Corinne and Dawn, who worked pretty hard on it wasn't a strategy, but it was a look at what other communities were doing and some suggestions for Salmon Arm, and I think that was 2011, if I'm not mistaken. So it's quite a while ago. And at that time, there wasn't a majority on council that had an appetite for really looking into this kind of initiative. And I remember our discussions at this table, and I think what's happened, though, is there's a real growth of awareness in our community and other communities and upper levels of government that maybe wasn't there at that time, or certainly not in the level of sophistication that we have now. And I would suggest there's a growth in need, too. So I'm really pleased to be able to support this, because it's people like the two that I mentioned and people like the rest of the members of the task force that are going to move this, because if left to councils, left to government, it wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen because no government wants to build and operate and find the land and all of that. We need support in the community like we have with this group. So I will be pleased to support this, and as Councillor Harrison said, though, it's educated a lot of us on the complexities and how a longer-term plan can help us access funds from other levels of government, because that's what we need to do. Salmon Arm Council, the City of Salmon Arm cannot afford to do this without help, and the help's in the community and the upper levels of government. So I'll be pleased to support this.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, not really much more to say about thanking everybody that's been involved. Everybody here has recognized the issue. Our council members that have sat on this committee and met many times have put this very much in the forefront of our thoughts, and everybody that's been involved, thank you very much. I did have a question. I will vote in support of the motion. I think it's very clear that it's needed and it's time, and we need to be ready for opportunities. But I did have a question. At the end of the memo, it says, "It is therefore the recommendation of HTF that Salmon Arm City Council develop and implement an achievable 5-year community housing strategy, allocate a budget of $60,000 in 2019, which it's very similar. It's just rewording the motion, and that the HTF continue to play. The $60,000 is allocated for the consultant who will work with this committee to develop the community housing strategy. Is that correct? Okay.
Councillor Lavery?
Yes, without a doubt, that's correct.
Yeah, we have a number of speakers, so those that have pushed their button will have to redo that. Councillor Lavery?
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not sure if I might design that even.
Should be. Now it's gone, so we'll try it again.
Here we go. Thank you very much. Without a doubt, that's the intent, but I think if I can represent the thinking of the Housing Task Force as well, as that consultant would be much more widely consulting with the community as a whole, as opposed to the Housing Task Force. This is a broader stakeholder involvement that's required, but the HTF wants to play that active role in shepherding that process, both in terms of the RFP and working as a resource for a potential consultant coming down the line. I think we have gotten up to speed incredibly well here, and it's invested time that can be utilized.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace-Richmond? No, it's okay. You're done? Okay. Councillor Flynn?
Okay, so thank you, and I'm glad staff brought up page 153. If we could go up to 152, and it's more me understanding, so the budget figure being requested is for the hiring of the consultant to move things forward. I guess my question is, because you've made it very clear this is kind of two-pronged and needs to be very nimble and adaptable because of the unknowns of the provincial and federal funding initiatives. If something came forward and was available to our community and we received some funding and somebody wanted to move forward, clearly one of the recommendations is that we regulate and incentivize and advising through current and emerging planning and development policies. I don't know that our development and planning policies are there yet. Are we able as council, before all of this is done, to say, I mean, I'm just going to use an example, waive DCCs on a project because it's affordable, it's a housing solution. And is that, I'm assuming that would be a completely separate budget issue and a completely separate discussion, but are we even allowed to do that right now under current legislation or under our current bylaws?
Corporate Officer?
Thank you, Your Worship. The intention of the Affordable Housing Reserve is to do exactly what you're mentioning.
And that's the money we put aside before.
I believe that was 200,000 that we put away.
That's correct.
Okay, well, I mean, to me, for the years I've been here, I've always said this isn't council or the city's responsibility. Clearly, it can't happen without council or the city, so to me, this is a no-brainer to support. It's time, and hopefully that graph that was so well exemplified by Councillor Lavery, hopefully this becomes this again, and we're ready for it. So I will vote in support.
Thank you. Councillor Lavery?
Yes, thanks again. In response to Councillor Flynn's question, I think that the example we're just talking about now in terms of response is what we did within the 2018 budget is found $200,000 as a contingency. Who knows when the next round is going to, there's going to be another round coming out prior to a housing strategy being developed, and that'll be the task of the next council to determine how and why and how to make this happen. But I do want to point out, and I don't want to be overly political here, but there has been some sniping about the $200,000 allocation that we put in as being not enough. These are key important steps. And I would suggest fairly directly that anybody who wants to further their information, you're more than welcome to talk to council, to talk to Councillor Wallace, Richmond, and myself, and especially to the members of the Housing Task Force. If this is going to be a political debate in the upcoming election, get informed, and I'd urge anybody to talk to the Housing Task Force about that. This $200,000 is a huge step late in the budget year in response to an opportunity that came forward as we were anticipating it might, but we didn't know what was coming forward. That same scenario will happen between now and the completion of a housing strategy, and hopefully the approach of the future council will be as supportive and responsive as this current council has been. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace Richmond?
Thanks, Your Worship. So often the narrative of politics is, well, let's strike a task force and let's hire a consultant. And we have indeed, in this motion, we're recognizing that and asking to do that, but it is so much more than that. So this task force has been together for 5 months. I can't emphasize enough that in those 5 months, this community is currently responding to a BC Housing RFP for dozens of units of nonprofit housing. This community has issued an expression of interest for some safe shelter housing. This community has persuaded council to set aside a reserve of $200,000 in the event that we would contribute to some development cost charges. We've submitted letters to BC Housing asking for support in terms of poverty reduction and homelessness. We've written letters of support for a potential application for a student residence. So we have to be responsive, and the province will not hand this to us. We have to go and get it, and that's precisely why we're doing this. And of course, I am delighted to vote in favor, and again, grateful to all involved. And I just wanted to recognize Paige, who has been the alternate for the Safe Society, who's been there many steps of the way, so didn't want to leave you out. Anyway, so I look forward to what happens next, and I'm grateful for the support.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison?
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I just want to ask a question about the $60,000. And I noticed that the spreadsheet that we were given, which is very useful, about other communities and things that they've done, and many of them have completed housing strategies. 4 of them, at least, Lumbee, Squamish, Fernie, and Revelstoke, have all accessed some grant funds. I'm imagining that probably some type of matching fund. And I want to know if the councillors or members of the task force are aware, or perhaps staff, of any kind of grant funding that might help offset that $60,000.
Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Wallace Richmond? Thank you, yes. Just a second. Councillor Wallace Richmond?
Thanks. It is our understanding through BC Housing that funding is available, but again, it wouldn't necessarily be, hey, will you spend this money for us? We'd have to have something up front. And it is a very important piece for them to see communities go ahead and take this step so that every community has a solution that's most appropriate for that community.
Thank you. Councillor Eliason?
Yeah, I'm not to speak about the granting, but I appreciate the work that Councillor Wallace-Richmond and Councillor Lavery have done with the committee, and thanks for being here and presenting to us. One of the main things that we need to recognize here is this funding only comes up once in a while. It went away for a long time, and now it's back. And we really rely on the senior levels of government for this funding. So when it's available, we have to try and get it. You can't attract people to your community for jobs in your community if you don't have housing in your community. So if we get a chance to build housing, whatever stream of housing it is that we're talking about, we need to take that chance and we need to take advantage of it. So whatever we can do at the city, it never used to be that the city was involved in housing, but whatever we can do at the city to help is important, because if we want to attract manufacturing, we want to attract jobs and tech and all the things that we're working on one side, we have to balance it out with support from the other side. So housing is very important for us, and I'm really glad that we're able to move this forward, so I'll support it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lavery?
Yes, thanks, Mayor Cooper, for about the fourth or fifth time, I think, here, in response to Councillor Harrison's question and adding on to Councillor Wallace-Richmond's response. There have been in the past some of these communities that got rural development funding for that. It was a very conscious decision as we were approaching the deadline for the latest round not to apply, because we didn't feel A, we were ready, and B, that there were other but there were other community projects we were applying, and we just didn't feel that it was a good fit at this time. So I think there's, I'm thinking that the Housing Task Force and staff are going to actively monitor this, because the other thing to keep in mind is the timing of applications for future ones as well. So I think that without a doubt it is a imperative to be monitoring that, whether that's rural development, whether that there's been, and we don't have full information yet, but there's indications that the province is going to be requiring regular data updates on housing down the line, and there's going to be some funding to do that. But if that's enough, or how timely, or oversubscribed is another matter. But these are things that are just in the near ether right now about those sort of things. But I think that the ability to look for things to offset the cost is important. And I want to point out in the Housing Task Force as well as suggested that, again, we're calling it a community, not a City of Salmon Arm housing strategy, but a community housing strategy, that if there are partner stakeholders in the community, much like the branding project, who are willing to, and this is a future discussion, but are willing to invest some funds to help us get along that way, I think those avenues have to be looked at as well. At this stage right now, as of today, there's nothing on the horizon, but we need to be looking for it, and I think that's our spidey senses will be ready to find those out. That's assuming that we move forward and hopefully continue to co-chair this committee.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you for one last time. Quick question. Can we get the motion back on the screen, please? So my question is, thanks to this table, and I do appreciate this, it was very helpful. Councillor Harrison mentioned a couple times. I notice on some of these it took 15 months, 17 months, 10 months, 18 months, 12 months. What is our anticipated time frame? Because I'm guessing, in my understanding of what's going on, some of these consultants that specialize in this might be fairly high in demand right now. Do we have an approximate time frame if we approve this as to when we could see the plan finalized? Or is it just going to be ASAP? The HTF and the consultant will work to bring something forward ASAP. Okay, thank you.
If not sooner.
Okay, sooner than ASAP. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you. And so thank you to all of you for your comments and for the work of the task force and the work of our councils. And so I will call the question.
Mayor Cooper?
Yes?
Sorry to interject. We don't have a mover or seconder on it yet.
I think it's quite clear who should be the mover and seconder.
These two. Mover. Councillor Wallace Richmond, second by Councillor Lowry. Okay, sorry about that. This is kind of important. So then I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. And then we were also bringing forward 16.3, is that? Oh, I'm sorry,
10.3.
Yeah. And I just wonder if Don would like to come down and just speak to this just a little bit. So welcome to council. It's a big day.
Yes, good afternoon. So we have submitted a request for a letter of support as CMHA is moving forward with responding to BC Housing's RFP in regards to a mixed housing unit model that is due September 17th, and we are asking for a letter of support.
Okay. Do we have any questions for Don? Do we need a motion? Councillor Harrison?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Don, for all your work on this. I know that I'm now aware of what mixed housing means, but I know lots of people are not. So can you just explain that for us again, please?
Sure. So this specific call is a mixed model between three different types of models. So one is an income bracket of $70,000 to $100,000, and that'll be a rent geared to income. So it'll be 30% of your income, which is in my sector, the definition of affordable is 30%. The 50% will be RGI, so those will be people with a lower income level, but that'll be an annual means testing as well, and so that'll be 30% of their income. And then the last 20% are going to be a deep subsidy, so that will be people that live on disability or have very low end of the income, and they will then get their rents will be based on provincial income assistance rates.
Great, thank you very much. I think it's really that's an important piece, I think, for the community to understand, that the mixed housing is it's really mixed between the amount of rent or ownership people have within the same building.
And then this will be a 60-year agreement with BC Housing, so they'll be flowing subsidy for 60 years. And so it's a lengthy operating agreement. Hopefully our application will be successful. It's the only one coming in from our community because we don't want to compete with we want to have our best ask. We're working with a development consultant firm to help us put this proposal together.
Okay. I know the deadline is, I think, September 17th. Any expectation as when you might hear?
We've heard it's going to be a pretty short turnaround, but we'll see. We've heard it's a regional review first, so it'll go to the BC Housing office in Penticton to do the first round of vetting, and then it'll move on to the province. We've heard early November they'll be informing of people who is the successful proponents.
That's a pretty quick turnaround. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you. Do we have a motion on the floor?
Not yet. Would you like to make a motion?
I'll make well, should I let you two make it again, or I'll make the motion?
Yeah.
Okay.
Moved by Councillor Flynn, seconded by Councillor Harrison. Certainly. Okay.
And speaking to the motion, clearly this is exciting. We're not necessarily ready as a community, but I guess my question would be through you, Your Worship, to staff. When we provide the letter of support, clearly we're supporting your initiative. Should we be mentioning the fact that we have put money into a reserve to possibly help with, I'm not trying to draft a letter now, I'm just wondering if that should be included, some of the initiatives that we've put in place recently, is that going to help? Because to me, this is the really exciting part, that we could possibly have something concrete to take to the community if you're successful, and I want to do anything we can to help your success.
Yes. In our meeting a couple of weeks ago, we did talk about mentioning that the city is an engaged partner, all the activities that have been done on a municipal level in regards to getting us ready for this, talking about the fund that's been developed, also talking about property tax exemptions. So really, I think anything that you can say that the city's willing and able to be a partner in this, but I don't think you need to make a formal commitment of a certain dollar amount, though it will be all hammered out with BC Housing if we get selected.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have anything further about that? Anyone else wish to speak to it? Well, thank you. This is exciting. It's an exciting day. We've made a lot of steps forward. And so I see Councillor Jameson would like to have a couple comments.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm sorry, I was just a little slow off the mark there, but just
all right.
building from what Councillor Flynn has said, I think it is important, even a line or two that does mention that the city is committed, because it shows that we're embedding this kind of planning into our, I mean, there's even a mention of OCP changes here. So I think this is an opportunity to show a real commitment. So I really strongly suggest that we do include just a sentence or two that commits in that way to making sure it's part of our overall planning.
And hopefully when you guys go to UBCM, hopefully you'll have opportunities to meet with Minister Robinson and BC Housing. You know, when there's an active call, there's a little bit of a cone of silence, but, you know, I mean, doesn't mean you can't talk about Salmon Arm when you're having a glass of wine or a cup of coffee with BC Housing, right?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lassen. Are you on?
Yeah, I meet with Minister Robinson quarterly, and I've met with her Assistant Deputy Minister and Deputy Minister last month, and they're well aware that this is coming in, and they're looking forward to it. And I've also told them that there might be another request for the secondary housing that Paige is working on as well. So
yes.
I'm really pleased with the work that you're doing, and they are well informed of all of Salmon Arm's grant requests. So fingers are crossed. Thanks.
And also the homeless outreach letter that you wrote as well would be an important thing to mention as well.
So I'll be meeting with Minister Robinson again on Thursday in 2 weeks.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much, Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thanks, Mayor Cooper. Don, thanks for your expertise and your commitment to this. You've been leading the way for a long time, and I think we're catching up, and hopefully we'll be able to walk with you in the next while. I would just point out with this, besides the rattling the political chains on our side of this, and again for the gallery, when these calls come out, they don't say City of Salmon Arm apply for housing. They say, here's an opportunity, and you need to have an approved, registered housing provider to do it. And so it's a really key factor, I think, that I became much more aware of, and it's a discussion of the Housing Task Force in here. It's a marrying of the resources that we have within the community, both political, financial, and supporting individual community organizations to move forward on this. And certainly we have a couple of registered, authorized, approved housing providers here, and the goal for moving forward. And I think, you know, this is going to be a 10, 15, we've been 30 years going into this. This is going to be 20, 30 years coming out of it. We're taking these steps right now, but the key is in supporting our housing providers who are currently doing the work and leveraging as much as we can, whether that be political influence, financial influence as well, to permit the good work that you're doing. So thank you for that.
Do you have anything further from council? So just speaking to the expertise part that Councillor Lavery talked about, we know that I think BC Housing knows that CMHA and Don Dunlop have the expertise, having done just a housing project not that long ago and at Foxridge and Foxcroft, and I can speak with authority on how well you did it, having been working with you at that time. So, and also the financial piece and whatnot that went with it. So we'll be well ready to talk to the minister at the UBCM. So thank you for that. And seeing no further speakers, then I will call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you so much for all that you do. Hey. Administrator, or actually corporate officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Item 6.1 is under confirmation of minutes as regular council meeting minutes of August 13th, 2018. I have a motion moved by Councillor Flynn, seconded by Councillor Jameson, that the regular council meeting minutes of August 13th, 2018 be adopted as circulated.
Okay. Do we have any questions or comments on the minutes? Seeing none, then I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Corporate officer?
Under item 7, committee reports, is item 7.1, Development and Planning Services Committee meeting minutes of August 20th, 2018. Moved by Councillor Harrison, seconded by Councillor Wallace-Richmond, that the Development and Planning Services Committee meeting minutes of August 20th, 2018 be received as information.
Do we have any questions or comments on these minutes? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried.
Item 7.2 is Housing Task Force meeting minutes of July 30th, 2018. I have a motion moved by Councillor Wallace Richmond, seconded by Councillor Lavery, that the Housing Task Force meeting minutes of July 30th, 2018 be received as information.
Okay. Do we have any comments or questions? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried.
Item 7.3 is Downtown Parking Commission meeting minutes of August 21st, 2018. I have a motion moved by Councillor Eliason, seconded by Councillor Jamieson, that the Downtown Parking Commission meeting minutes of August 21st, 2018 be received as information.
Councillor Jamieson?
Thanks, Your Worship. Have to ask what that word "nat" means.
Oh, it's Gantt. It's spelled wrong.
Yeah.
It's a Gantt chart, you know, when you have everything laid out in timelines and different
Oh, it's
schedules?
a Gantt chart.
Yeah, it's also very small, so we can fit in all the information, but it's a.
Okay. And
Okay.
Thanks for catching the spelling mistakes, I appreciate that. I was gonna see if anyone got it.
Councillor Wallace Richmond?
I would just wanted to know,
Same thing?
I thought, could that be a Gantt chart?
Yeah, it's across.
Yes, okay. It's a hybrid of, okay, excellent. Yeah, thanks.
Sounds good. Are there any further questions or comments? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Corporate officer?
Under introduction of bylaws is item 8.1, City of Salmon Arm Road Closure Bylaw number 4266, first, second, and third readings. I have a motion moved by Councillor Lavery, seconded by Councillor Wallace Richmond, that the bylaw entitled City of Salmon Arm Road Closure Bylaw number 4266 be read a first, second, and third time, and that council authorize the sale of closed road, Plan EPP 81980, as shown on Appendix 3 of the staff report dated August 9th, 2018, to J&J Bickle, R&M Morgan, and H&E Taylor for the total sum of $64,000, and further that the sale of the above lands be subject to the following. 1. Compliance with Section 26 and 94 of the Community Charter and Policy 3.16. 2. The lands being consolidated with the applicant's properties as shown on Appendix 6. 3. All associated costs being the responsibility of the applicants.
Okay. Development Services?
Thanks, Your Worship. Your Worship, the three property owners read out by the corporate officer have proposed to purchase a old road that was dedicated in 1968. It's 10 meters wide by 100 meters in length. And if I can get my screen up on the overhead, I can show a bit more. Thanks. So the property owners looking to purchase this road are Lot 1, 2, and 3 in the Ridge subdivision. And across the road to the south is the foothill of Mount Ida. And on the ortho photo, you can see that the road is unconstructed, undeveloped, mostly covered with trees. And the property line, one of the new property lines, was created just a few years ago, in around 2016, when the Bickles went through an OCP, official community plan and rezoning application, to rezone this portion of the former property to R9 estate residential zone. And so this portion of the property is hooked to Lot 1 across the existing road. And this property line, which is not straight or anyways, it follows a creek. That's why it's curvy. And it looks like how it does. And the Bickles approached the neighbors to see if they'd be interested in purchasing the road. They approached the city, and council agreed to the $64,000 offer, which is above the appraised value. And because a road is being proposed to be closed, it has to go through a bylaw process. And if all said and done, then the road would be amalgamated to each property. Trying to find that. It would be split up so that the Bickles would receive 41 square meters of road. The Morgans would receive 32 square meters of road, and the Taylors would receive 26 square meters. And then the road would be amalgamated and all would be said and done. 3 readings is being considered today. Then we would go to public notification in the newspaper according to the community charter, after which time we could bring it back for final reading.
Thank you, and thank you for your work on this. So, council, do we have any questions for staff? Councillor Harrison?
Thanks, Your Worship. No questions, but just a comment. First of all, this particular piece of land, I can't see it being of use to anyone else. It's not needed by the city. We looked at the possibility of a greenway, but because of the way the land, this land is situated in comparison to Foothill Road, it's not a good spot for a trail, plus there's properties in between. And it is $64,000 more into the city coffers. And we did just agree on a $60,000 item. So that's a nice coincidence. So I would encourage council to support it.
Thank you. Do we have any further comments or questions? Hearing none, I think we're all just liking the idea of $64,000 to offset the $60,000 we already talked about. So then I will call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. Corporate Officer?
Item 8.2 is City of Salmon Arm Fee-for-Service Amendment Bylaw number 4278 and the Cannabis Retail Stores Policy number 3.20. I have a motion moved by Councillor Jamieson, seconded by Councillor Eliason, that the bylaw entitled City of Salmon Arm Fee-for-Service Amendment Bylaw number 4278 be read a first, second, and third time, and that the Cannabis Retail Stores Policy number 3.20 attached to the staff report dated August 10th, 2018 be adopted.
Thank you. Development Services?
Your Worship, starting with the proposed fee-for-service amendment bylaw, what is being proposed is a new fee category for cannabis retail processing tied to a business license application. This would be a separate fee, non-refundable of $1,000, and that fee is intended to cover the costs of advertising and staff time to prepare a report and do some background research when a provincial cannabis retail license is referred to the city. And the other part of the motion is to adopt policy number 3.20, cannabis retail stores policy and application procedures. It's a 2-page policy with 2 maps attached. And the policy outlines location preference criteria for cannabis retail stores. And it outlines procedures for the city to deal with applications referred to by the province. And it's fairly simple in nature. There's no zoning amendments required for this type of application. It's similar to a liquor license application, As I mentioned at the planning committee last week, the difference being is this type of application, we would be required to do some kind of public notification, which this policy envisions one advertisement in the local newspaper and all properties within 30 meters of the storefront being notified, including other tenants within a building. There was some discussion last week about amending the policy to address medical marijuana and parks. I didn't amend the policy because there was no formal direction to do so, but I can certainly answer questions on that.
Okay, thank you. This has been a lot of work for staff, so I really appreciate all your work on this, Mr. Pearson, and it's going to be history-making. I believe it's October 17th that it is scheduled to be legalized. Cannabis is scheduled to be legalized. Is that correct?
That's what I hear.
Okay. Thank you, yes. So we've looked at this a lot, and I know Council will have some questions and some possible amendments too, but we'll see where they would like to go. So Council, anyone wish to speak to this? Councillor Jameson?
Thanks, Your Worship, and this has gone on for quite a while, and it's gone on because we've pursued it, but we've also given the public a lot of opportunity here, and I think that's a really valuable part of what the report that Mr. Pearson prepared. We've had a couple of evening sessions, and we've had surveys, and people have had points of view that they've expressed to individual councillors and to us and to staff. So I think we've come to a point where we're really close, if not right there, where we could pass this. I have a couple of things. I know we had some brief discussion about the amount, the $1,000, and I thought about it, and at first I thought that was a little excessive, but I don't think so now. I think there's going to be required work on this. It's not a regular clothing store. It's not a convenience store. It's not a regular retail outlet. So I think it's going to require more research, more reporting on the part of our staff. And so I think that we need to take that in consideration. Of course, then there'll be the advertising cost too, because again, the public can have input. The second thing I just wanted, it also gives Council of the Day some flexibility. And I kind of like that too. We can say yay or nay in certain places, or successive councils can. And what might seem like a good idea today might not be a good idea tomorrow for a location. So I think that council needs to have that authority. I don't think we should have buildings with cannabis retail outlets with residential units in them, quite honestly. I don't think that that's a good idea, and it's likely that they will be rental units, and rental units change over time. And so four or 2 or 5 occupants might say, what a great idea, and then there might be a complete turnover in the next couple of years where you have 5 people who say no, or the other way around. So I think that there's a good case made for not having people live in the same buildings. I'm not sure if other people feel the same way, but those are my thoughts on it. But what a thorough report, though, and we always compliment Mr. Pearson on his reports because they are easy to understand and they're pretty comprehensive. So much of this is I think is spot on, and I will support it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harrison?
Thank you, Your Worship. We talked a bit about this at our planning meeting. First of all, like Councillor Jameson, I support the $1,000 change, and I think that's a fair amount. I don't think taxpayers should have to subsidize an application, and so I think $1,000 is fair. So I'll support that piece. And I certainly agree with him too. The policy, it's a policy, so there is some flexibility for council. The feedback that we've received, and we've received a lot of feedback, but a lot of the feedback has said we'd like cannabis stores to be treated similarly to liquor license operations. And I would say that this policy does that. Of course, the province determines where liquor outlets can be located, and they have quite a large circumference around them. That's why in the downtown core there's only one of them. Here the city will decide, and I know we had some discussions about capping the number of stores, and I had some people ask me about it, and they didn't really understand the whole thing. And so I'm wondering if we can just look at the map of the core area. Yeah, this one's pretty good. You can actually go back to the other one because it shows a little wider breadth. It doesn't show canoe because there's a spot in canoe as well. But what this policy says is that in the downtown core, which is the area surrounded by green, that the suggestion is a maximum of 4 cannabis retail outlets in that area. There may be cannabis retail outlets in the other commercial areas that are pink as well. And I think that I think 4 in that area is fairly dense. We had talked about the possibility of having proximity between stores, and that probably would result in less than 4 in the downtown core, because if one was located right in the middle and there was a proximity away from it, you wouldn't be able to fit any others in. So I think the cap of 4 is appropriate, and of course council does have some flexibility if they wish to add to that at the time of application. I think it's a good start based on what other communities have found out as far as density of stores go. The other question that's often asked, and I think Councillor Wallace-Richmond talked about it last time, was not really related to this policy, but it was about where people can smoke cannabis. And our bylaw is, as far as smoking goes, applies to cannabis. So no, you cannot smoke it in parks or in places like that. Just the same as you can't smoke on the beaches, cannabis would apply in the same way. So as far as the policy goes, I support it. I agree with Councillor Jameson about upper residential units, and this discourages or gives council the flexibility of not having cannabis stores located, retail stores located where there's upper floor residential. So I will support the motion as is stated in this report.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Worship, and through you. We did talk about this at the planning meeting. I did mention a few concerns I had, but I do want to make it really clear that the time and energy that staff has put into this, and the community, to come to open houses and council, but mostly thanks to staff. There's so many unknowns here, and I originally, to me, what was clear from public input is that the community wanted and is willing to accept a moderate regulation option. And I think staff has brought forward a very moderate regulation option. Whether I agree completely with a couple of the decisions, I think I will still vote very much in support of the recommendation. I think there's really, to me, 4 key areas that could be questioned or argued. One is the license cost. I thought it was a little high, but in fact I think it may be a little low, and it's good to know that it can be changed one way or the other depending on what reality is. So I think this is a bylaw that needs to be reviewed after a year or year and a half of experience by whoever is sitting here next year. Proximity to schools. We heard numerous arguments, and if you actually look at the statistical analysis of the different proximities, you could argue 250 or 500 is kind of the majority. I'm fine with starting at 500 meters. I think staff has found a balance there, and again, that can be changed. One of the ones I brought up is, I mean, in the long term, I would like to see our downtown be all mixed use. Commercial on the main floor, residential above. That's a long ways away. I think that one we will have to revisit, but I'm fine for now not mixing. Because my vision of downtown is complete mixed use with more people living there than are now. And then the limited number, I had struggled with that, but I think 4 is a good number, and Councillor Harrison explained how that's going to work. And I think, again, it's a good moderate option. So as much as I personally may think this is less than moderate, I think it is moderate, I guess, but I'm okay with all of those areas, knowing that it should be reviewed in the next year and a half once we know what's happening. So all I would say is that if we approve this, or when we decide whether we approve this, if it is approved, I'd like to formalize a review in the spring of 2020 to see how it's gone. So I will vote in support. I appreciate all the effort of staff, and this is a new area for all of us, and it'll be interesting to see how it goes.
Thank you. Councillor Lavery?
Yes, thanks, Mayor Cooper, and Councillor Flynn, perhaps that could be reviewed in 4/20, April 20, and go from there.
Okay.
I'll start off with another attempt at humor as well. So for the past few months, I've been walking around town, and perhaps people may have thought that I've been mumbling to myself, and that's not really the case. I do that, but I've actually been pacing out distances between places, because the circular maps that were provided were very good, but just to provide some real context to that. So if you need to know distances between various organizations, just talk to me. This is the end of one process, and it's the beginning of another that we'll be dealing with very quickly. And I think it's important to note that what we have in front of us reflects pretty clearly the input that we have received. Other councillors have referred to that. I feel very confident that this document reflects what we've heard. And I think it's probably caused a few of us to shift where we thought we should go, and what might be better than others, but it does reflect that input both of individuals and groups. It's been extensive input, and again, thanks to staff for reflecting that, and also reflecting on the options that are available for us. So I fully support this as moving forward. I did raise at planning 2 issues. One was I have had concerns about the integrity of our business licensing process, because, to be straightforward, in the past, it wasn't particularly adhered to with the sale of cannabis. I did make a suggestion about specifying the type of cannabis retail to be had, but in discussions with staff and my own further thinking on this, I think that the provincial enforcement of this will negate any need to have that specific label about distinguishing between medical and non-medical retail sales, so I'm comfortable with that. I am comfortable, and it took me a little while to get, and this is a few months ago, get to this idea of a cap of 4 spaces, of up to 4. As other councillors have referred to it, it nicely and elegantly, I think, and simply meets the balancing off of threshold between locations. We did hear comments, we don't want rows of weed shops all in a row. But it also lets the market dictate where that will go. And I think, again, this is a very elegant one. I would note, and I'm not 100% accurate, but I think that in Colorado, for instance, in Denver, it was 15 shops per 100,000. This exceeds that, actually, by a little bit. And I think it's more than adequate for the retail market that we have here. I also was, probably the toughest thing for me has been the I should take a step back. I really like the idea of stating our location preference criteria, with the key word being preference. And the one that I've struggled with, up to today even, is the distances between community centers and public parks, and putting a threshold on there. My thinking up to a short while ago was that we should list that in the preference criteria. But I guess just in the last hour here or so, as I listen a little bit more and talk a little bit more, I'm comfortable leaving it and adopting this as it is. I do think that there will be a role for council down the line in terms of preference criteria to make a distinction between if somebody, and this is purely hypothetical here right now, wants to open up a dispensary right across or very near to a public park versus something that's around the corner and down. And when I've talked to other local governments and read their material, and from the industry itself, it says, okay, have thresholds, but have some flexibility in those thresholds to be able to look at variances that make sense. And I think that the preference criteria does that. I'm just going on record here now that, again, I'll support fully without making any amendments, because I had, coming into this meeting, thought of making an amendment about the distance from parks. But I think that, just go on record that the nature, any application that's close to a park should be treated like a variance with just due consideration from this table and the factors involved. So thanks to staff for good work on this. Thanks for the input. And our next task to get to work will be deciding who and when and where, and that'll be here sooner than later. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace-Richmond?
Thanks, Your Worship. Just quickly, I think we responded responsibly to the community's call for moderately regulated retail sales of cannabis. I know there will be some confusion in the days ahead because what we currently have is medicinal marijuana retail sales, which, if I understand correctly, under the current legislation is not, in fact, permitted use federally. It can only be sold through the mail, I think. But so, we'll see how that goes. My understanding is everyone will have to reapply. Everyone will have to pass the same level of scrutiny. And as soon as the legislation is passed in October, will businesses wanting to either stay in or get into this business be able to apply here at the city as of the 17th of October, assuming we get through fourth reading? That's my only question.
Okay. Through you, Your Worship, I understand the province is already accepting applications.
I see. Okay.
So whether the province will wait until the federal bill receives royal assent in supposedly October, or whether they will refer out the applications to local governments any week now,
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But the fact that the province is taking in applications, I suspect that we're going to see them before October.
I see. Okay. So having said that, quite happy to support it as it is. I like the idea of reviewing it in, let's just say, in a year from now. I look forward to, I mean, we don't really know what's going to happen. So I look forward, it'd be interesting to look back in 5 years and say, oh, why didn't we think of that? Or we should have thought of this, or we were so smart to do this. So we'll see what the future brings, but great start, and we've certainly covered all our municipal responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jameson, something further?
Yes, thanks for the second opportunity. Just 2 points. It was referenced about how the applications will come to the city, and I think that's a really important part of this, because if it goes the way I think it will go, the provincial government will create a queue, and it'll depoliticize the applications at the local level, so that, oh, well, let's look at that one first, even though that one came in sooner, or we know that person. And so it eliminates that. And as the province sends the applications to us, I suggest that that's how we process them, in that order. And I think that'll help. The second thing, the medical health officer's recommendation, and it was at the back of the report. I think that's an important piece of it for our thinking as well. And when it comes to schools, and it comes to playgrounds, and when you see community centers, whenever I think of a community center or the arena, I think of kids. And I think one of the important points that the medical officer made, in fact, I think it was the first one, was to try to delay first-time use of cannabis. And that's a really important consideration for us as lawmakers and for kids. The longer the delay is from the first-time use of marijuana or cannabis, the better. And I mean, this report is no way an advocacy of the use of cannabis. It's just a recognition that we have to, we will, upon public input, we will provide opportunities for people to buy a legal product. So my suggestion is that we make sure that it's as far away from kids as possible. And I think the standards that we've set in this report are good, or they're good ones. So those are just a couple of points that I wanted to make.
Thank you, Councillor Jameson. And thank you to all of you for the points that you have made, for your thoughtful consideration, to our staff for all the work that they put into this, because I know it's been going on for a long time. We've been looking at it and getting input from the community, and so I really appreciate all the work the staff has put into it, and all of you for all of your input and your thoughtful comments. So, Councillor Larson, something further?
Yeah, no, I was speaking to the first time on this one. I remember when we built the skateboard park, and people said a city without a skate park is a skate park, and so now we're legalizing marijuana dispensaries, and I think that may cut down on, if you can put 2 and 2 together. If you guys can draw a Venn diagram, I think you'll figure this one out. It's not a NAD chart; it's a Venn diagram. They're very similar, but they're quite different. So I think it's an important step, and early stages, lots of work. But as you've all said, this will all work itself out, and we'll fine tune it as it goes. Nothing's perfect, so thanks everyone for your work on it.
Thank you. Is there anything further? Seeing none, I will call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Corporate Officer.
Your Worship, that takes us to item 10.1, informational correspondence.
So, who would like to look at some of the correspondence? Councillor Wallace-Richmond?
Your Worship, number 1, I wonder if we could get some clarification from staff. I wasn't sure if I understood. So nothing is changed? Is that what's happening here? We will not be changing the address of the hall? We are. No change. To the legal description, okay.
Development Services?
Yeah, I just found that it's a fascinating process to legally change an address, and I wondered, how something like this is implemented. Just like that.
Your Worship, if you want me to clarify.
Yes, please.
So after we received this letter, Development Services, we looked at the property, and we looked at the area up in Glen Eden, and the property is accessed off a very narrow rural lane, very narrow in width, and but the address was 50th Avenue Northwest, and the actual street number is 49th Street. Before we considered changing the address for emergency reasons and for the reasons outlined in Mr. Gervais' letter, we just wanted to make sure that the other people that access their properties from that narrow road were okay with the address change. And so we notified them to see if they had any issues or concerns, and nobody did. So this is just to inform you that we followed up and changed the addresses.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Your Worship, through you to staff, so this now goes to like 911 and the fire department and all the emergency services, is that right?
That's correct, okay. And Canada Post.
Okay, great, wonderful, thank you. Thank you for taking care of that.
Did you have anything further, Councillor Wallace-Richmond?
Not on this letter, no.
Okay. Did someone else wish to speak to this? Councillor Flynn? No. So no one else wanted to speak to this letter. Did you have another letter that you wish to speak to?
Number 2. And others may want to, in such a busy time and such a devastating wildfire season, isn't it great to have a nice word of thank you from another department? I just thought that was great.
I think we all like to are all appreciative of our fire department. Did you wish to speak to this, Councillor Flynn? Okay. Councillor Flynn?
Yeah, I'd pushed my button for this item, but this is great to see from outside the community, but I think our community saw firsthand on Friday. Amazing response, and if you followed what happened on Facebook at all, it was pretty much unanimous from everybody that spoke about it, that the response time, the professionalism, the actions of our volunteer fire department were amazing. So this isn't surprising. It's neat to hear it from outside the community, but I think it was exemplified within our community on Friday. So nice that they get this acknowledgement from somewhere else, but I'd like to acknowledge them from here for what they do here as well.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace-Richmond, did you have anything further to?
I did have two
Go ahead and push your button.
I did have two more, Your Worship, but I'm willing to take turns. Item 3. I just wanted to make sure that the event that's coming this Thursday, they have everything they need, the adaptable water sports.
Director of Engineering? Okay. A motion to make sure they have everything that they require?
Approve. We approve.
Okay,
that.
to allow them to use the park, second by Councillor Flynn. Okay. Anyone else wish to speak to the motion? Okay, hearing none, then I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried.
Okay.
Is there anything further?
Finally, Your Worship, item number 5.
Okay.
I missed one? No, I can share. I said I could share. Mr. Howard's letter. He has some very, how should we say, creative ideas for the use of some parking downtown. I think sometimes our job here is to do a little bit of directing traffic, and I'd encourage Mr. Howard to make sure that he takes this up with the Parking Commission and the DIA. We have to go through steps, and as much as we enjoy having presentations, it's not necessarily up to us to make a call as sort of considerable as this one. So that would be my only thought on the matter.
Thank you. So just wondering if anyone else would like to, did anyone want to speak to this at all? No, hearing none. Did someone else have some correspondence that they would like to speak to? We'll give Councillor Wallace-Richmond a break.
No, that's it. That's all I had. Somebody better say something. I feel bad.
Councillor Flynn?
Councillor Wallace-Richmond didn't talk about 4, but I think we had a previous conversation about whether the Social Impact Advisory Committee, did I get it right for once? Yes. The Social Impact Advisory Committee was going to bring something forward or discuss this issue. And like I said in the past, I don't think we can change what a private business decides to do, and I think this is a bigger issue than Salmon Arm, but wondering if if this should be referred to them, or it has been. Okay, thank you. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lavery, just a second.
Yes, thanks, Mayor Cooper. Thanks, Mayor Cooper. If we could have item number 6, please, which is from the Fraser Basin Council. And I just wanted to speak to it a bit, and through you, Your Worship, to staff, if we could have that referred to the Environmental Advisory Committee for their September meeting, it would be great. Just to fill it in, Council delegated me to go on Valentine's Day. I remember that because I got back too late to get something. But on Valentine's Day to look at the Thompson watershed in terms of applying for disaster mitigation planning. This table knows here that we've put money aside for a number of years for that. We made an unsuccessful application, I think in year 2 of the term of this council for funding. And the discussion, I think, has morphed into in a positive way of looking at this in terms of watersheds and in terms of applying for various sections of a watershed in terms of disaster mitigation funding, which is 50% federal, 50% provincial. So it was in mid-February, it was the inaugural meeting of the Thompson Watershed Community. They've broken it up into North Thompson, South Thompson, Kamloops, south of Kamloops areas. They are now starting the process to apply for funding. I guess I would ask, I'll talk to staff later on this, but the intent of looking at watersheds is the way to go in my view. It might mean that a salmon arm interest might be bumped down the line a little bit when they prioritize other watersheds and needs. But when I cast my mind back to our application, we talked about salmon arm within the salmon arm boundaries, and it really is on the other side of salmon arm and downstream from salmon arm as well. So this is a theoretical approach, I think, that is good. I'm not sure when the next meeting would be, but I would certainly think that we should have a representative from council at that table at the time and to go from there. So I just wanted to sort of close the loop on what happened a few months ago, and we'll talk about that at the Environmental Advisory Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have anything further?
No, that's it. Thanks.
Did council have anything further? I'm not seeing anything else. Was there anything on there that you saw that we needed to deal with?
We do have item 10.2,
Okay.
which is the request for a Rainbow Crosswalk celebration on Tuesday, September 25th, 2018.
Okay. So we need to, we would need a motion.
Yes, please, Your Worship.
Okay. Councillor Wallace-Richmond, do I have a seconder? Councillor Harrison? Okay. Speaking to the motion, I just think that it's nice that the youth are going to do this. They're going to look at it. They're going to have a special opening for it. So I think that's a really great idea. They kind of are the ones that started it way back with the first time we went to and held a council meeting up at SAS. So I appreciate that. Councillor Lavery, do you have some
Yes,
comments?
thanks, Mayor Cooper. I certainly support this. I have a clarification question from staff. Does insurance coverage and things like that apply in here, and how would that work, given that this is a fairly spontaneous small group that's applying to do this?
Director of Engineering?
So, Your Worship, yeah, they are required to have event insurance, and they can purchase that through any insurer.
And are again, through as a follow-up, are they aware of this?
They will be when we send them the letter.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wallace-Richmond?
Your Worship, I suggest that through the Wellness Center, which is part of the school district, they may well have insurance for events as they've held others over the summer. So.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to the motion? Oh, Councillor Jameson?
Thanks, Your Worship. I'll be out of town on the 25th, so I just want to make sure that I lend my support and my thanks to Monica for bringing this forward. I'll be out of town on the 25th, or maybe arriving back late that night. But I think as a guy my age, having spent a good part of my working life with kids, I think one of the best teachers for me has been experience. And being with kids who at the time probably weren't quite sure what their identity was, and maybe it developed later, or there were times when they were pretty sure. And I can think of kids that I taught that were in my classroom at the grade 8 level and grade 9 level and grade 10 level that this means something to them. And so, like I said, it's experience has been my best teacher, because many years ago I might not have thought that way before I went into the schools. And so I just like to lend my support to Monica, because I think it's a brave thing to do, and it's an important thing to do right now. So I won't be there, but I certainly want to make sure that my support is with them.
Thank you. Is there anything further? Hearing none, then I will call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Corporate Officer?
Your Worship, that brings us to item 11, staff reports. And under 11.1, we have a report from the Director of Corporate Services with respect to the 2018 Property Insurance Award. And I have a motion moved by Councillor Flynn, seconded by Councillor Harrison, that council award the contract for provision of property, crime, equipment breakdown, marina operators legal liability, and environmental impairment liability insurance to the Municipal Insurance Association of BC for the period of September 17th, 2018 to September 16th, 2019 for $157,965 with the option of renewing for an additional 2 years, subject to receipt of a satisfactory quotation 45 days prior to commencement of the next policy period. Your Worship, staff issued an RFP by invitation in July, and we sent it out to Johnston Myers and Salmon Arm, MIABC, and the incumbent Capri Insurance CMW out of Kelowna, and received 2 RFPs back. Johnston Meyer did not receive terms in time. I do know that they made an effort, but weren't able to come forward with anything. While there is very little difference between the 2 amounts, Capri CMW came forward with a quotation of $161,686, and MIABC came forward with a quotation of $157,965. MIABC was the lowest, and staff came forward with a very good proposal that covered all of the city's needs. Capri CMW has done well for the city over the last 3 years. However, MIABC did have some limits that were better, some coverages that the city believes are valuable in addition to the coverages that we asked for. MIABC stepped forward with a sort of a catch-all extension that makes sure that if any of the additional benefits are not sufficient, this extra 50 will go towards covering off that deficiency. So staff were really impressed with that. MIABC has an in-house legal team. They have in-house claims handling, and we have a lot of experience through their liability insurance program. So I have no qualms about recommending that we award the contract to MIABC for this policy year.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn would like to speak to this.
Well, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to staff for a detailed report. I'm extremely excited to support this motion. I think MIA's venture into something besides liability, which is the commercial fire and theft and all of those things. I think our timing with regards to this is good. They've sharpened their pencil. I think that they now have significant experience, and I think it may have been premature 3 or 4 years ago when they were making the foray into this area that it might have not been the best time to move forward, but life is all about timing, and to me, it's not about the financial difference. I think it really is about what MIA has exhibited as an organization that assisted local governments when we couldn't get liability insurance. We are an owner, in a sense, of MIA, so we're supporting our own organization. And I think the extra, the staff, this hands-on and the extra support, I think we will find invaluable moving forward. I did have a question. As I understand it with MIA, we are supporting MIA, but there is local service, is that correct? Or there's a local connection?
Through Your Worship, I think originally that was the intention, but everything is out of Vancouver at this current point.
Okay. Well, I support the recommendation. It's more cost effective, and I think we'll find value for the dollar. It'll be even more effective than the savings that's shown.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Do we have anything further from Council? Hearing none, then I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried.
Your Worship, item 11.2 is Shuswap Regional Airport Commission appointment. I have a motion moved by Councillor Harrison, seconded by Councillor Wallace Richmond. that Chelsea Van de Capelle, Chief Financial Officer, be appointed to replace Monica Delziel as a City of Salmon Arm representative to the Shuswap Regional Airport Commission for the remainder of the 2-year term expiring December 31st, 2019.
Do we have any comments?
Your Worship, this is just a replacement on the commission, and by virtue of Chelsea's role as Chief Financial Officer, it's appropriate for her to take over Monica Delziel's spot.
So thank you, I agree. Do we have any comments from council? Councillor Harrison?
Welcome, Chelsea. Great to have you on there. Monica missed her flyover this year, so it's still available. Just see Mr. Neuenhausen to book that.
Alrighty. Do we have anything further? Hearing none, then I will call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Welcome to the Airport Commission.
Item 11.4 is the sidewalk inspection and maintenance policy. And I have a motion moved by Councillor Jameson, seconded by Councillor Lavery, that Council adopt the sidewalk inspection and maintenance policy number 5.18 attached as Appendix A to the staff report dated July 25th, 2018.
Okay. Engineering?
Thank you, Your Worship. So this is something that's been discussed for a couple of years now. It has been reviewed by the city's Risk Management Committee, and it was recommended that we come up with a policy for maintenance and inspections of our sidewalks. We don't have the capacity to inspect the sidewalks, all of our sidewalks every year. So this is a complaint-based response, but also when we're doing general maintenance to sidewalks, we'll do some observations, and anything that we feel that is within the tolerances that needs repair or flagging will be done so, and we'll have a better tracking system once this is implemented.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Flynn?
What an exciting day. So many insurance things or potential insurance things. I'm just loving life. Quick question. Was our liability risk manager and insurer MIA involved in this?
Your Worship, they had recommended that we look into a policy as well, and that's where this originated from.
Have we run this policy by them?
This is basically from their template.
Okay.
So we haven't run it by them, but it is up to us to develop the policy.
I guess if we use their template, that's kind of running it by them. So, thank you. I think this is a good step forward, and I'm glad the Risk Management Committee has put it together.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jameson?
Thanks, Your Worship, and I guess Mr. Neuenhausen references there's many kilometers. Do we have an idea of how many kilometers of?
Your Worship, we have approximately 45 to 50 kilometers of sidewalks, and we have them all over the city, right? So we have a very large area, and so it's difficult to do an annual inspection of that.
It's a great idea, though. It's and making it complaint-based. We already get lots of complaints, so I think our work is cut out for us when we start to investigate all of them. But it's a good idea, and I know that, like Councillor Flynn has said, it's a insurance issue, and the last thing we want is anyone getting hurt. So thanks for coming up with that.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison?
Yeah, thank you. I support this as well. I just wanted an explanation on item 2, like the differential in a sidewalk. Is that a slab of sidewalk, and does that mean the slope of the sidewalk?
Your Worship, the differential is the height. So if there's a trip edge, if you have a trip edge under an inch, it'll be marked, it'll be identified. If it's over an inch and greater, then obviously there's different levels of repair required and different urgencies.
Okay, so I understand.
It's all about if it is a potential risk or height difference in the sidewalk.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have anything further? Hearing none, then I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried.
Item 11.5 is supply of bulk aviation fuels and related delivery services. I have a motion moved by Councillor Harrison, seconded by Councillor Eliason, that council award the contract for supply of bulk aviation fuels and related delivery services to Petro Value Products Incorporated at their quoted unit prices for a term of 1 year commencing September 1st, 2018.
Okay. Did you wish to speak to this?
Your Worship, we've had Petro Value delivering fuel to the Shuswap Regional Airport for the last 2 years, and this is the final year of the original contract award, and they have held fast with their prices, and we have no concerns with the service that they're providing at this point. So next year, during the summer, we would go out to RFP.
Do we have any questions or any comments? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried.
Your Worship, item 11.6 is budget amendment and project award for 10th Street Southwest and 20th Avenue Southeast and Shuswap Street sidewalk extensions. I have a motion moved by Councillor Lavery, seconded by Councillor Jameson, that the 2018 budget contained in the 2018 to 2022 financial plan bylaw be amended to reflect an increase to the 10th Street Southwest sidewalk upgrade and amended to reflect an increase and extension project allocation in the amount of $35,000 funded from the reallocation of Community Works Fund monies as follows. Decrease the 20th Avenue Southeast Sidewalk Extension Project allocation in the amount of $15,000. Decrease Shuswap Street East Side Sidewalk Replacement Project allocation in the amount of $20,000. And that the 2018 budget contained in the 2018 to 2022 financial plan bylaw be amended to cancel the Shuswap Street East Side Sidewalk Replacement Project, and that council award the 10th Street Southwest and 20th Avenue Southeast Sidewalk Extension projects to Blackburn Excavating Limited in accordance with the terms of their proposal for $238,669.20, $170,229.65 and 68, $439.55 respectively, plus applicable taxes.
Okay, thank you. So will this complete 10th, the sidewalk going up 10th?
Director of...
Yeah, go ahead. Director of Engineering? Not quite.
Your Worship, in answer to your question, this is just a section between the village on 10th and 10th and Hopkins Meadows. So it'll complete that section in front of the single-family residences. Between there, we still have another section that goes north of the McHugh development. Mm-hmm. It's also a strata, and it'll go up to 22nd. If I can get my screen on, if possible? Can I get my screen on, please? If you can see the red line, so there's Hopkins Meadows in the bottom. The photo is old. Hopkins Meadow is completely built out now, and then the sidewalk will stretch between them. We do have some property acquisition through there, but it'll complete a large chunk. So we're very excited about that. The other sidewalk project is on 20th that we were going to be completing up in the Hillcrest area. And this is another section that basically completes, like Badger Park is here, it completes the sidewalk component up to 20th Street Southeast. And the one project that we are deferring is the Shuswap Street project, which is essentially in front of the new School District 83 building. It was on the east side of the street, and that came in over budget. And if you're wondering why we have deferred that project, being that really the total amount is only $13,000 over, is you'll see in the next report that we'd like to use that funding for the well, to complete the funding for the airport taxiway Charlie. But essentially, we can get the 2 projects done this year. We will probably postpone and budget for the Shuswap Street project in 2019.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the explanation. Councillor Harrison?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Can we just go back to the 10th, the map on 10th? And does it go down lower?
Not quite.
Okay, all right, that's okay. First of all, really appreciate staff's decisions that they've made here in order to make projects happen, and especially the allocation for the study on Taxiway Charlie. To me, it makes lots of sense because we're still completing the 2 sidewalk projects where there is no sidewalk, that being on 10th and on 20th. And there is a sidewalk, albeit one that needs replacing on the west side, opposite the DAC, but there is a sidewalk there. And we have done the east side. So I think the decisions are very good. As far as this sidewalk goes, so I did hear the director say we will have to do some property acquisition. And the power poles there, then, will those have to be moved?
Your Worship, we're locating the sidewalk so that the power poles won't have to be, they might be shifted over, but hopefully we won't have to move them very far because we're limited in our space in that frontage.
Yeah, I could see that when I looked at it. So I'm wondering, because I think the sidewalk that's in front of Hopkins Bluff is actually farther to the, which direction is right here?
Yeah, it's to the east, or sorry, the west, yeah.
Yeah, it's farther to the west than the one that goes along in front of 10th and 10th.
That's correct. It's an offset sidewalk.
Yeah. So will a bend be right at 10th and 10th there?
That's correct.
Okay, that makes lots of sense. So there's less property acquisition and shouldn't have to move the power poles then. I should have known you'd have thought of all this, but I was just wondering myself. Could we then just look up at 20th? And this is a sidewalk I think probably many of us are familiar with. I'm certainly familiar with it because of the location in relation to Hillcrest School. But especially with the new housing development, this really does complete a piece that is missing and is an important one along that busy 20th Avenue Southeast. So I'm really pleased that they've been able to still complete this piece by moving a little bit of the budget around. So I will support the motion.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jameson?
Thanks, Your Worship, and I too will support it. I'm especially pleased with the one on Piccadilly, what we would call Piccadilly, because I don't know how many times we had special referrals and people make presentations, and every time we say, yeah, that's a good idea, but we don't have the funds. And now we have the funds through reallocation, but also we have a lot of that area having new sidewalks because of the development that we had to wait for. So 2 good projects, though.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Worship, and through you. Just a quick question. I really appreciate the maps, and I know with planning and other things, the maps are in our agenda, and I want to be able to say our agendas are really, really thick. So is there any reason why we don't get, quite often with these, we don't see a map like this in our agenda package? Is it too hard to copy? Is it too hard to attach?
No, Your Worship, we can add the maps.
I like to look at maps. Question with regards to land purchase. That isn't in this budget that we're voting on to award to Blackburn. Is there a reserve to buy the land that we need, that you said is needed for this extension?
Your Worship, it'll all be coming out of this budget.
Okay.
So, and the sidewalk in its current location, I was in error when I first said there's land acquisition required. The location of the sidewalk is right along the boundary.
Okay.
So it depends. There is some discussion with BC Hydro about them getting right-of-way, and so we would assist with that. But we have to see how that's going to pan out.
Well, thank you to staff for juggling things around and making this happen. I did want to go back to the other map too on 20th. And I just had a question. Will this sidewalk being proposed have any signage near where it stops to recommend the flow through the park instead of walking along 20th, because I think if you go through Badger Park and you come out, then there's another stretch with sidewalk, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
So,
We'll maybe we'll talk with the Trail Alliance about signage.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anything further? I think this is going to be much appreciated by both the people on 10th and here on 20th. When they see these sidewalks go in, I think they'll be quite appreciative. So thank you for your work on this and reorganizing and putting things, moving the monies around so we can make it happen. So I will call the question then. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried.
Your Worship, item 11.7 is Shuswap Regional Airport Taxiway Charlie Preliminary and Detailed Design Award. I have a motion moved by Councillor Harrison, seconded by Councillor Jamieson, that the 2018 budget contained in the 2018 to 2022 financial plan bylaw be amended to reflect funding for the Shuswap Regional Airport Taxiway Charlie Design Project in the amount of $110,000 funded from the reallocation of Community Works Fund monies in the amount of $55,000 and general revenue in the amount of $55,000 from the Shuswap Street Sidewalk Replacement Project, and that the city's purchasing policy number 7.13 be waived in procurement of the engineering services relative to project number ENG 2018-62 to authorize the sole sourcing of same to WSP Canada Incorporated, and that Council award the engineering services contract for the Shuswap Regional Airport Taxiway Charlie Design Project to WSP Canada Incorporated in accordance with the terms of their proposal dated August 23rd, 2018 for an estimated cost of $108,272 plus applicable taxes.
Okay. Engineering?
Thank you, Worship. These recommendations are longer than our reports. As you recall, Your Worship, we took a report to Council acknowledging that BC Air Access Program had revisited some of their grant applications, and they had awarded us funding, a share of funding to complete Taxiway Charlie. Now, up on the screen, I've got a copy of the airport master plan, and you'll see the WSP did the master plan for us. And that was one of the reasons why we selected them, because of the short timeline and turnaround that we need to do this design work. The reason I'm showing you this drawing is because this shows Taxiway Bravo. It's the diagonal line that cuts in and goes to the middle of the runway. And what Taxiway Charlie is proposing, or the section of Taxiway Charlie that we're looking at building, is the section, I don't know if you can see my mouse there, but from section, actually the apron A, and then over to the middle of the existing runway. And during the design process, because we have a fixed amount of grant money, we want to have the design incorporate some of these fingers that go down in front of the new hangar locations. I'll just go down here. So this shows it a little bit better. So we were planning on opening up 3 hangar bays for development this year. I will be recommending to our Airport Operation Committee that we postpone that until we complete the construction of Taxiway Charlie, so that there isn't any interference between the two. And also, depending on how much money we have, we're going to try and look at designing for these aprons as well, and that might allow us to open up more hangar locations. So we have had the discussion with WSP. They are more than willing to do the design for us within our timelines, and therefore our recommendation.
Thank you. So again, thank you for finding the money for kind of moving things around, and we appreciate all of that. So Councillor Harrison is our airport rep. Would you like to?
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. The Director of Engineering's done a great job of explaining once again. because we got the grant money, 550,000, it's forced us to get the design work done. Sometimes it goes the other way. We got to get the design work to get the grant. So this is actually good news, really, for us. And it's probably clear to everyone that Taxiway Bravo right now is cutting right through the lands we need in order to build hangars. And as all the council knows, the land out there is, there's not lots of it, and we have to maximize the use. The second piece is, of course, Taxiway Charlie is much more functional than Taxiway Bravo will be. It'll be parallel to the strip with access in the middle, which is what we want. So appreciate staff finding the monies to do the design work. And once we get the grant, then there'll be talk about likely going to counter petition to get the rest of the funds for our half of that project.
Thank you. Do we have anything further from council? Hearing none, then I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you.
Your
Corporate
worship,
officer?
the next item is council statements.
Okay. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Your Worship, and Councillor Harrison may want to add to my statement, but being on the board of the Rec Society, I want to encourage everybody to get involved in the Shuswap swims, exercises, performs, plays. Oh, Councillor Harrison's going to do it. There, that's better. I was at Wednesday on the Wharf last week, or went down there, and there was a booth there where the consultant and Dale and Darby and our team, our new pool, what's her title? Pool programmer, head lifeguard. We're all there taking input at the Ideas Fair. Right here, there is a pop-up booth at the Fall Fairgrounds for 2 days, and there's an online survey. We need community input. Hopefully we'll get even more input than we did on the cannabis legalization, and way more input than we did on the panhandling. But bottom line is the consultants that have been hired by the Rec Society to work on this are trying to get as much input as possible. So we want regional input. I know the media's gone, so we're talking to our favorite person to make sure she provides input online. But I just think it's everybody's job to get people involved. Yep. So I think it's important, and it's exciting.
It's on Twitter and on the Facebook, and I've been sharing it on Twitter, so we want to.
So, and I know Councillor Lyson wants us to rush through this part of the meeting, but I think that's important.
Oh, no, I just didn't know who you were talking.
We all know about this.
Yeah. Ken Jameson, Councillor Jameson.
Thanks, Your Worship. Maybe we'll have a fuller and richer report at a later date on a bike ride I went with a couple of our councillors here, and we'll talk about that at another time, unless they want to share their experiences. Couple things. Mayor Cooper and I took part in the Shuswap Watershed Council review week before last. Unfortunately, only 4, I think, of the 7 people were able to make it. So the meeting was shorter than it probably would have been if all 7 were there. However, I think that we covered it thoroughly. I really think we did a pretty thorough job. And I'm not going to say anything about it because Paul Deminick just sent out actually the draft, right. And then it goes back to the council for review. It'll go to the regional district, and then we'll get that. I think he said middle of September. I think is his date that he wants to have it released. So we'll read more about it. Generally speaking, I would say generally speaking, the council's done some good work, and we're really pleased with some of the results. And there's differing opinions on some of the aspects of the reporting and the financials, but more will come, and I know that Paul will provide a pretty thorough report. That was, and the other one was, there's 2 others. Thanks so much to Mr. Noonhausen. I got to drive around and look at some of the repaired damage from last year. I really appreciate that look at that, because that's always a highlight of my summer, is to be able to go out and get an explanation of what happened, what was broken, what got destroyed, and then go back the next year and see how well it's been repaired. And we've had some major projects because of last year's flooding from 2017. So, and then the last one was Roots and Blues. I don't know what else I can say. I'm a longtime patron and volunteer, and it was as good as it gets this year. And I really appreciate all the work that goes into it, and Councillor Harrison's representation on that committee. And they put together a really good weekend, and some new ways of doing things, and it looked a little different. Every year it looks a little different, and I think that's probably what makes it so good and so enjoyable.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, I'll just be brief. Councillor Flynn did a good job on this piece, and I think we can all share that, as you have, your worship, on Facebook and Twitter. And as Councillor Flynn said, not just within the city boundaries, we want to get it out there regionally, so that everyone has their input. If we can all spread that, that would be great. The Roots and Blues, Councillor Jameson, I agree, it was quite an event. And not only the board and all the volunteers of Roots and Blues, but our staff here at the city. I think the Roots and Blues really feels like it's a team working together, and they really appreciate Director of Engineering and Public Works and his involvement and help. So it just ups the bar a little bit farther for next year, and it's really interesting because Peter North and Dave Ganella, they're planning for 2019, 2 to 3 months before 2018 happens.
Yeah.
That's where they're at now. So it's just a great festival again this year, and thank you for everyone who helped.
I think that's something important to mention, is that they start way before that. They're already planning 2019 a few months ago. I had people say to me, well, they do this pretty good. When did they start? Like, a couple months ago? And I'm like, oh no, it's a much longer process, right? And I think a lot of people don't understand that, but it was just a really great festival, so thank you. Do you have anything further, Councillor?
No, that's all, thank you.
Councillor Wallace-Richmond?
Thanks, Your Worship. I just wanted to remind council and staff that this is the last week of the Culture Walk downtown. There's some interesting artwork to see, and that the skateboard competition on Saturday was probably 3 times the attendance of last year. So I expect next year we'll have an even bigger crowd, and I hope we can continue to support that.
Thank you. Councillor Lavery?
Yes, thanks, Mayor Cooper. I just note that there is a memorial service for Hugh Tyson this Saturday, 3 p.m. at the United Church. We've already sent our condolences officially in mid-June, but Hugh was a friend of many here and at this table, and certainly a key part of our Environmental Advisory Committee. And so that memorial will be happening on the weekend, 3 p.m. United Church. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have anything further from council? Hearing none. Administrator? Or corporate officer? I just read the front of it.
Your Worship, the meeting will recess until 7 p.m.
Okay, thank you. Oh, you had something more, Kevin, Councillor Flynn?
It's on the agenda.
Oh, the...
PSRD, I know Councillor Eliason feels we've reported, but I do think it's important to highlight 2 issues for council and anybody who may be here in the future. The first one is the very first item on the highlights. I think it's extremely interesting that Area A is taking the initiative to put a referendum on the ballot about contributing to 4 key or core facilities and contribute to the net operating costs. It's too bad there's no media or anybody else still here, but you all know my thoughts on the fact that we only get funding from Area C for only the arena, I believe. And we have way too many free riders, and we just talked about our Shuswap Regional Airport, where even though it's a regional airport, the region only funds operating costs, not a portion of operating costs, not capital costs. For too long, I think we've had free riders, and Mr. Hamilton, the CAO at the regional district, agrees with us. I think we need to focus moving forward on making sure that a fair contribution is being made by users from all areas. So anyway, it's interesting that it's happening in Golden, and I brought this up before, but in Alberta, they're legislating it. And consultants that I met at FCM are spending an unbelievable amount of time helping counties and cities come up with their legislated solutions. And perhaps we need to legislate it here, or we need to have differential pricing for all our facilities. So anyway, it's happening in the regional district. I think we need to continue to focus on that moving forward, and whoever else is at this table, whoever is at this table moving forward, that needs to be a focus. Now, let's talk about an example of the regional model working, and that's the EOF application for Area E and the rail trail corridor. And it's interesting in this report that we got, Councillor Harrison spoke to these areas that had other funds, CBT funds and EOF funds, and really our solution is we should dam Little Shuswap, control our lake level, and then we'd get funding. Nobody's here now, that's sarcasm, but get funding because our area's been flooded. But Economic Opportunity Fund, the amount of money that's available in the Economic Opportunity Fund is amazing. The amount of money, taxes in lieu for hydro areas, we don't have any of that. So Area E and Sicamous have come forward with their Economic Opportunity Fund monies to provide the money needed from the regional district to apply for the Rural Dividend Fund to set up the initial money to help us move the rail trail forward. So we supported their application. We don't have to come up with funding at this point in time. Clearly in the future, there will be a discussion around operating costs and upgrade costs, and 3 councillors here might have trespassed on that trail and checked it out on bikes last week. It's going to be amazing, but it's going to need lots of funding. And this is really nice, that a great example of Sicamous and Area E taking a leadership role with funds that they have easily available that we don't have access to. But let's not kid ourselves. In the future, we are going to have to contribute, I would think, in some way, shape, or form. But nice of them to step forward and provide this funding.
Thank you. Councillor Eliason?
Yeah, I was just going to say everybody's read the report and read the board and brief, and I was just going to see if anyone had any questions about any of the other things, because I'm happy to answer them now or later. We're good? Okay, thanks.
Okay. So now we recess.
Thank you, Your Worship. The meeting will recess until 7 p.m.
Paul, I'm glad you made one mistake. I thought you were going to get through it without a mistake, and that was not you. We'd have to phone.
What are we doing for dinner?
Not to come back.
I don't know. I'd like to go now if I could, because I have a 5:30 meeting to present to a bunch of employees.
It's up to Aaron, really.